Hi everyone, this is Eric from Dumb Game Dev, and today we are going to be looking at another tutorial. In this case, we're going to look at how you can click on an object and then click on a place in the scene and that object will move there. So this is just the basics. We could, dress this up a little bit more to be even more fancy, but I'm just going to show you the very basic way to do it and get you started. Now, I already have this set up in my scene, so I'm just going to show you how it works, and you can ignore my silly sound effects, but they're just placeholders for now. So what I'm going to do is just click this cube and then click somewhere on the scene and it will move there. Let's click play. Now when I hover over this cube, it changes colors. When I click down, it will play a sound and change to blue. And then I can click somewhere and it will move there. So as you can see, it does zero itself out vector-wise. We'll talk about why after and how you can correct that. So you can see if we click anywhere on the screen without clicking the object first, nothing happens. First we need to select it and then click a place for it to go. Okay, so let's do this. Let's just start from scratch. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide my objects here quickly so that we don't see them. And I'll create an empty one just called hidden. Whoopsie. And we'll throw these in here so we're not using them. Okay, so when you open up a new scene, you should have your main camera, directional light, and if you're using Playmaker, it will add the Playmaker GUI. Now, I've also gone ahead and created a ground. This is just a cube, and I've just stretched out my cube, and I threw on it a simple grass material just to give it a nice little look. But you can just use a normal cube, however you want it to be. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a cube for my moving game object. This could be a sphere, or it could be a character, it could be whatever you want. I'll just use a cube to make things nice and simple for now. And I'll call this, we'll just call it, say, Cube Man, so we know that's what we're moving around. Now, Cube Man definitely needs a box collider, and it doesn't need to be a trigger, but it does need a box collider. If you have some other kind of object, you have to make sure that it has some type of a collider, otherwise this won't work. Now, the next thing I want to do is add a FSM state machine to this, so I have my Playmaker window already open. So if I just add an FSM in the first state, I just want to initialize this. Okay, I spelled that right. So the initialize state is going to get self and store to a variable. So we need to tell this cube to get itself and store it. Or my daughter's home, she's talking in the background. So let's use an action to do that. And I've already have these in my recent actions here, but the one I want to use is, let's see here. Okay, I don't even see it there. Maybe I'm looking at, oh, okay. Here it is, get owner. So we want to get the owner. What it's going to do is just get itself and store it into a variable. And you'll see why this is important later. Okay, so just store this into a new variable and call it, we'll just call it this game object. So now once this starts and we push play, you should see here that it gets the name of itself, which is Cube Man. So that's exactly what we want. Now the next thing we want is for when our mouse hovers over and clicks and stuff like that. So we're going to need 4 states for this, so we'll just add them. And the first state, I just want the mouse over state. And then we're going to call the next one mouse exit. So this will be when the mouse comes over and the mouse comes off of it. We want the mouse down for when the mouse clicks on it, and then mouse up, so when the mouse button comes off of it. So how we get these to trigger is we have global events already built in, or global transitions, and we want system events. So the system is already built in. So when we have mouse over, it will trigger this state. We add global transition system events, then we have mouse exit. Then for mouse down, we're going to use global transitions, system events, mouse down, global transitions, system events, and mouse up. Okay, so let's just play this and then we'll see what happens. So when the mouse comes over, you can see this state is triggered, and when it comes off, the mouse exit is triggered. Okay, when I click on it, mouse down, when I let go, mouse up. Okay. Great, so that's what we need. Now, when the mouse is over, for example, we could do all kinds of things, but I'm just going to change the color here. So the action I'm going to use is called set material color. I'm just going to change this white material to be red. So when the mouse is over, it'll turn red. And when the mouse comes off, I want it to go back. So I'm just going to set it to be white. Let's try this. So the mouse is over, it's red, and the mouse is off, it goes white. So we could use all kinds of things to, if you know you want it to get bigger or smaller, or play a specific sound like a little blip when your mouse comes over. So for mouse down, I also want to set a color, and I'm going to set it to blue. And then when the mouse comes off, I want it to set back to red. So not to white, but to red, actually. All right, so let's test this. And then we click it. Uh-oh, that doesn't look like it's working here. Mouse down. Okay, let's try instead of mouse over. I think there's another one. Global transition. So let's delete this transition here first, and I forget how to do that. You know what, I can't even figure that out, so I'm going to delete that and just redo it. So this is mouse over, and needs a specific color. So instead of using mouse over, let's use mouse enter. I think that's the one we want here. System events, mouse enter. Let's try this. And that's white. Okay. Okay, I think this will work. So, uh-oh. Mouse exit, mouse over. Okay, we forgot to change mouse over to be a color. So, red. This is why we test everything every few seconds. So, mouse over, it's red, and I come off. There we go. So that's what we want. So now when we click it, it changes to blue. And so I also played a silly sound, so you could just go like play sound. And you could choose whatever sound you wanted. So I'm just gonna, I don't know, choose something crazy here like a door. Now, when we click this, we want something to actually happen. And we're gonna manage the movement of this object on another FSM. We're not going to manage the movement on the same FSM. So what we need to do is send it to a different FSM. We need to trigger another FSM. So I'm going to make a new empty game object, and I'm going to just call this cube mover. So this one is empty. There's nothing here. It's just invisible. But it's just going to hold our FSM. And we have to add some initialization state. But we don't need it to do anything. So I don't want this to trigger until we want it to trigger. We're going to have to use this, a global event. So we'll call this triggered. So when I click on the cube, I want this second FSM to trigger this state. And so we need a global event to do that. And my global event is going to be called clicked. Okay, so to make it a global event, we have to click here, and this will make it global. Whoopsie. So we'll add it to the state. So global transition clicked. And we'll go back to CubeMan. So when, not on the mouse down, but I'm going to use mouse up. We need to send an event. The event target is broadcast all. I'm going to send it just everywhere. And I'm going to use the send event global clicked. And I don't need any delay. I can exclude the self. And then that's it. So let's see if this works. Let's just play this. So when we mouse over and click, and it goes up, it should trigger. There we go. It's gone to triggered here, you see. So let's watch this state. So you see it's on initialize, but I'm going to hover over, click, and now it's gone to triggered. Okay, so once it's been triggered, we wanted to wait for another click, a second click. So the first click will be to click on the object. The second click will be to move it. So in the second click, let's just add a finish state. We want to wait for a second mouse down button. We got to wait for a next click. So we want get mouse button down. So when the mouse button comes down, it goes to the next state. So this first triggered state, I'm going to call it wait for mouse down, right? Because that's what it's doing. The next state, I'm going to call it pick location, because we want to pick a location. Then after our location is picked, we want to move to location, right? So we want to pick a second location. And to do this, I'm going to use the mouse pick event. And I want to store a point. So it's going to be a vector 3. I'll make a new variable called picked location. So we'll store wherever I click into this picked location, anywhere on the screen. So the thing is, I don't want it to be anywhere on the screen. I only want it to be the things that I want to pick. So for example, the ground. Now you could use other objects. Maybe you only want to be able to click to other objects. Maybe you only want to click to bad guys or whatever. So for me, I just wanted to move to the ground. So I'm going to use a layer mask. So I'm just going to choose 1 because I want 1 layer mask. I'm going to choose my ground object here and the inspector, and I want to change it to the layer. I've made a layer called movable. So you can go ahead and add whatever layer you want and just give it whatever name. It doesn't matter. Mine's movable, so I know what it is. Go back to my cube mover FSM. And on my pick event here, mouse pick, I'm only going to set it to be movable. So this means I can only click on the ground. Okay, so once I've picked something, lastly, I want to move to that location. So let's use our actions, and I'm just going to use, you can use the move to action, but I'm going to use the itween move update. Okay, so I don't need it to look at anything. So where do I want to move it to? I want to move it to a vector 3 position, so the picked location is where I want to move it. Okay, so here's the tricky part. What it's going to move currently is the game object itself, which itself is just this empty nothingness, right? So it's just going to move this over here, blah, blah, blah. So that doesn't help us at all. We need to give it the cube's property, that it's moving the cube. Okay, so if we choose specify game object, we could just drag this in here and move it this way, and we'll move the cube, bleep, bleep, bleep. The problem is if we have like 5 or 6 different cubes that we want to be able to pick, it would only move this one. So how do we pass it the variable to move whatever we clicked first? So if we go back to CubeMan, you saw at the beginning we initialized, in the initialized state we have get owner. So the cube gets itself, right? If we push play, CubeMan knows that CubeMan is himself. So we need to pass on this CubeMan to the cube mover. So how we do that is when I click mouse down, right? So I'm going to add on this state. I'm going to add a game object variable here. So let's do this way. Not get owner. Game object. Okay, so set game object. Okay, so the variable we want to set is we're going to use this game object, which is CubeMan, and we want to set it to a variable. So we're going to need a global variable. And I actually already made a global variable. I'll make another one just to help you out. So to make a global variable, click down this global variable button down at the bottom. And we want to create a variable type of game object. And I'm going to call it move to, or what am I going to call it? I'll call it move this object, okay? Because it's the object we want to move. Move this object. So we'll close this down. So still on our CubeMan, still on our mouse down, we're going to set a game object. So we want to have this game object is going to become, or go into the global variable of move this object. So once I click, this will become this, or save to this, okay? So we go over to the cube mover, and now we can tell it what it should move. So the game object it should move is, we'll use globals, and we'll use move this object, okay? So now it will have CubeMan. Let's try this and see what happens. Hopefully this will work. Okay, so we click it first, then we click where we want to go. Click and move, click and move. So if we just click anywhere, not going to work. Click here and click into the sky. Nothing. So there we go. It's exactly, well, pretty close to what we want. So we see it's moving pretty fast. If we go back to the cube mover, we can add more time so it goes slower. So maybe I want to add 5 seconds. Click on it and click to where it goes. And there you go. So if we're using a global mover like this, we could set up different kinds of movements. Okay, I'm using the iTween move update. You could use the move to action, or just move towards, or just, I think there's even a move. Anyways, there's different ways that we could animate this, but I suggest you start with the iTween movements and play from there. And what's nice about this is if we change anything, it changes everything globally, so we don't have to change each one. Let's try this. So as you see, we can move more than one object. Okay, so one not so great thing about this is you can see it can only move one object at a time. So maybe this is something you want, maybe it's not. If you didn't want it to be this way, you could create the mover as a separate FSM onto each one. So for example, CubeMan could have 2 FSMs, one as the mouse click FSM, and you could add a second FSM onto it and have the second, well, that's not what I want. Have a second FSM on here called mover. So each one could have its own mover, and then they would continue moving until you were done. So for me, that's not what I wanted, but if you do, then that's one way that it could work. Okay? So hopefully that helps you out to get started on moving things around. I might throw up a second part to this after talking about using navmesh or other ways to move this around. I personally don't like my things floating around. I have characters that I want to walk around, so I'll show you how I do that after. Okay, so the second part of this tutorial is going to show you how to use this with a navmesh. If you don't know what a navmesh is, you should maybe watch this and see if it's what you want to do. If you do know what a navmesh is and you don't want to use it, then that's fine too. So navmesh is especially helpful when you're using like a third-person controller. You want someone to walk around. I'm not going to go into all the animation stuff right now. I'm just going to show you how to use navmesh to move around this cube, but the same principles apply. Now, to move this cube using navmesh, we need to make sure that it has a navmesh agent. So you'll see what this does, but it's just choose add component. You can type in navmesh agent and add the navmesh agent, okay? The next thing you need to make sure is anything you're moving, of course, you don't want it to be static, so make sure it's unclicked on static. But for your ground, wherever you're moving things on the ground, we want the ground to be checked off as static. So the next step is we'd open under Windows and you want to get navigation, and I've got mine docked over here, and it's going to look like this when you first get it. And what I want to do is just click bake. And what it's going to do is bake all of the static objects in your scene as being walkable, something we could walk on. So you can see the cube is not blue. It doesn't generate a navmesh because it is not considered walkable. Now, there's all kinds of settings and stuff you can get into with navmesh. I'm not going to really go over that. There's other Unity tutorials on that. But once you have your navmesh baked, this will be the area that this cube can potentially walk. So as you can see, it won't walk off the screen, it won't walk under, it won't walk above, it will stay on this navmesh. So to make the next step here, we don't actually need to change anything on this cube at all, I can think of. What we need to do is go over to the cube mover, which moves it, and we don't want to use this iTween move update anymore. So we'll remove this, and instead we'll use another action. And this action you need to download from the ecosystem. So you need to get this from the Playmaker ecosystem, and you need to have ecosystem installed. It'll be under your add-ons, ecosystem browser. And here you want to look for the path finding package, and then choose get. Mine says delete because I already have it installed, so you'll choose get and it will download it. Once it's done, it's going to add these navmesh actions here. It'll be navmesh agent and navmesh, which you need to do this. Then once you have that done, we're going to use a specific action from this navmesh agent. So I like to search them. I'm just going to choose I want agent. So agent destination. If you type in agent destination, you'll get set agent destination. And it says, oh, this game object requires a navmesh component. Well, we're not using the owner. We want to move the cube. So just like before, we choose specify game object. Pass it a variable. The global variable is move this object, and as you can see, the red warning has gone away because we already added a navmesh agent to this cube right here, right? So we'll go back to the cube mover, and the destination, we also set up the destination in this pick location, so we'll just pass it our variable called pick location, and then that's it. So let's hit play. And if we click anywhere, nothing happens. We have to click the cube first. Then we pick a destination. And as you can see, it moves along the navmesh to the location we want. And as you can see, the navmesh has a consistent speed. unlike before, as well as the navmesh will keep it above the ground nicely. Okay, so if we wanted to go faster, we can edit the navmesh agent here on the cube. So each cube or object could have its own speed. So let's just yank up the speed and the acceleration. And as you can see, now it goes a little bit faster. We can even do it higher, something really crazy high. And as you can see, it goes real fast. So if you want to use a navmesh, I suggest you look up some more tutorials on navmesh. It will help you out to understand sort of how to set it up and what it does and stuff like that. But if you're familiar with it, anyways, this is how I've set it up with a nice simple click event where you can use multiple objects. So I hope this helped everyone out. Go ahead and leave me a comment and let me know what more tutorials you'd like to see, or let me know if I made any mistakes here or something that you might do differently.